He had become head of a gang of bullies and misfits who enjoyed hurting anyone unlucky enough to get in their way. He had stopped even pretending to do any work. Why did he need school? He'd been excluded from 2 of them and knew that there were plenty of ways to earn a living that didn't involve maths or science or reading or any of the dreary things that were thrown at him in class. He was 11 years old when he first became involved in drugs. There was a gang, a real gang, in the neighbourhood where he lived, and Brian was thrilled when he was asked to join them. A small, sickly boy was exactly what they needed. This was how it worked. The customer would draw up in their car and hand over the money to the dealer. They would signal to Brian, who was waiting at the corner, usually smoking. The dealer would walk away, and only then would Brian come forward with the product. That way, the dealer was protected if there was a police ambush, and because Brian was underage, there was a limit to the amount of time he could spend in jail. Brian sold drugs. He took drugs. As far as he was concerned, it would have been stupid not to. When he reached his teens, his 2 front teeth had rotted away. His eyes had gone a strange shade of yellow, and he had lost most of his hair. As if to make up for the collapse in his appearance, he had become interested in body piercing. He had 5 studs in his ear and others in his tongue, the side of his nose, and his nipples. He really liked this new image, even though to everyone else, including his horrified foster parents, it simply looked as if his body was falling to pieces, and he had made a desperate attempt to pin it back together again. He started seeing a girl called Lucy, and had Loosie tattooed on his arm. It was a shame that he had never learned to spell. Brian did well as a criminal, certainly better than he had ever done at school, and he was lucky. One summer, when he was 16, all his bosses got wiped out in a gang war, and this left him free to go into business for himself. He started selling drugs on his own behalf, although he was smart enough to keep well clear of his old stamping ground, moving his operation to the other side of the city. He settled in Putney, southwest London. His customers were the kids in the local schools, the young men and women on their way to the clubs, anyone actually who wanted what he had to sell. Nobody knew him as Brian anymore. He was known by the name of the car he drove when he did his rounds. People called him Skoda. And Skoda had one remarkable idea that would serve him well for years to come. He needed a base where he could prepare the drugs he was selling. The various white crystals that came into his hands had been smuggled all the way from South America, and once he had them, he added glucose, baking powder, dried milk, even rat poison, anything to make them go further. By this simple method, he could double or treble his profits. And what did he care if he was ripping off his customers, threatening their health at the same time? His brainwave was to buy a boat, a barge called Blue Shadow, that happened to be moored on the River Thames close to Putney Bridge. Working quietly and using suppliers from all over London, he converted it into a floating laboratory with glass flasks, weighing machines, Bunsen burners, everything he needed. It was the last place the police would have thought of looking, which was actually ironic because it was quite close to a major conference centre that they often used. It amused Skoda to think that while they were all gathered there going on about the war on drugs, he was actually continuing the war right under their noses. Everything went well for Skoda until the day Alex Ryder came along. Even now he wasn't quite sure what had happened. He'd been enjoying a glass of gin with a friend of his, Beckett, the 2 of them measuring out the next batch of drugs, when suddenly, without warning, the barge had begun to rise out of the water. It had been a moment of complete insanity, with cups and plates, jars and test tubes, pipes and burners, all tumbling and smashing on the floor. Desperately, the 2 men had tried to get out onto the deck, only to find that the door was locked. Skoda's world had been turned upside down, for real. He and Beckett had found themselves tangled together at the bottom of the cabin, screaming in fear as the entire boat was lifted out of the river into the air. It was only much later, when he was recovering in hospital, that he'd found out what had happened. Skoda had been selling drugs at a school in Chelsea, a place called Brookland. It turned out that one of the boys who went there had followed him back to Blue Shadow